Lily had always been her mother's perfect daughter, quiet, obedient, and willing to sacrifice her own happiness for the sake of her family. But when her mother forced her to marry a blind millionaire, claiming it was to replace her deceased sister, Lily's world was turned upside down. Little did she know, her husband, Alexander, had known the truth all along, and his love for her would change everything. Lily Carter had always felt like she was living in her sister's shadow. From the moment she could remember, her older sister, Isabella, was the golden child, the beauty, the intellect, the one who could do no wrong. But when Isabella tragically passed away, her mother, Claire, fell into a deep grief. And that grief manifested in a way that Lily could never have expected. Lily was no longer just her own person. She had become a vessel to fill the void left behind by her sister's absence. Her mother's expectations, her constant comparisons, and the pressure to be what Isabella was were overwhelming. And when Claire arranged a marriage for Lily to Alexander, an enigmatic millionaire who had gone blind in a tragic accident, Lily's life took a turn she hadn't anticipated. Lily Carter sat in her mother's drawing room, staring at the delicate tea set in front of her. The clinking of the teacup against the saucer echoed in the otherwise quiet room. The curtains were drawn, as they always were when her mother had guests. But today, there was no guest, only her mother, sitting opposite her, as if preparing to discuss an important matter. "Drink your tea, dear," Claire Carter said, her voice smooth but edged with an emotion Lily couldn't quite place. She poured herself another cup, her actions slow, calculated, as if every movement had a deeper meaning. Lily hesitated before lifting the cup to her lips, her fingers trembling slightly. It wasn't the tea that made her nervous. It was the silence between them. For months, Claire had been acting strangely, as if the weight of Isabella's death had pulled her into a world where Lily no longer existed. She couldn't talk to her mother about anything personal anymore, and every attempt at conversation seemed to dissolve into thin air. But today, something felt different. Lily's instincts told her that the silence was about to break, that her mother had something significant to say. "I've been thinking about your future," Claire began, placing her teacup down with a soft clink, her eyes narrowing as she looked at her daughter. Lily set her own cup down, a knot tightening in her stomach. "My future?" she asked, her voice unsure. Claire nodded, her lips pressing together in a thin line. "Yes. You know how important it is for the family to maintain its standing, how important it is to uphold the legacy of your father's name and wealth." Lily swallowed, the room growing colder despite the warm sunlight streaming through the windows. Her father's wealth and reputation had always been a source of pride for Claire. But for Lily, it had always felt like a burden, something she could never escape, no matter how hard she tried. "You're still young," Claire continued, her voice softer now. "But in our world, a woman's future is tied to the man she marries. And I've found a perfect match for you." Lily's heart skipped a beat. A match. She had never been consulted about her future or her desires, always just expected to go along with whatever plan her mother had for her. "Yes," Claire said, leaning forward, her eyes gleaming with what Lily recognized as excitement. "A man who is wealthy beyond your imagination, someone who can give you the life you deserve, the life you've been raised to inherit." Lily's head spun. She didn't want a life handed to her. She wanted something of her own. She wanted to love, to choose. "Who is he?" she asked, unable to mask the curiosity and anxiety rising within her. Claire smiled, a tight-lipped expression that didn't reach her eyes. "His name is Alexander Westbrook. A very successful man, wealthy, powerful, influential. And despite his condition, he's one of the most respected men in our society." Lily's mind raced, trying to connect the dots. "Condition," she echoed, her voice faltering. Claire's face hardened, as if she had prepared for this question. "Alexander is blind. A tragic accident several years ago. But that doesn't matter, Lily. What matters is that he is a suitable match for you. He is everything you need." Lily's stomach dropped. Blind? The word echoed in her mind, unable to fully comprehend the implications. Blindness didn't just mean physical sight was lost. It meant the world, The future, the possibilities were changed forever. I don't understand, Lily whispered, her voice trembling. You want me to marry a blind man? Claire leaned back, her fingers steepled before her, a calculated calmness to her every movement. It's not about his blindness, Lily. It's about the family name, the connection. You'll be well taken care of, and you will provide him with what he needs. It's a simple arrangement. You'll be the perfect wife to him, and he will provide for you. The marriage will be one of convenience, but that's the way of the world, isn't it? Lily's mind whirled as her mother's words sank in. An arranged marriage to a blind man, to replace her sister, to fulfill her mother's expectations. She hadn't realized how far her mother would go to fulfill her vision of a perfect life for the family. She hadn't realized how much of her own desires were irrelevant in the face of it. Lily looked at her mother, her throat tight. What about me? She asked softly, her voice breaking. What about what I want? Her mother's face hardened, and she leaned forward. You don't have a choice, Lily. Your happiness is secondary to the family's future. You'll marry Alexander, and you'll take care of him. That is your duty. Your father would have wanted this. Lily's heart ached, her mind screaming in protest. This wasn't her life. This wasn't her choice. Her mother's words weighed on her like a heavy shroud, and yet, she knew deep down that she had no real say in the matter. She would marry Alexander Westbrook, and it would be the end of any hope of a life of her own. The next few days passed in a blur. Lily couldn't shake the image of Alexander Westbrook from her mind. A blind millionaire, rich, powerful, but bound by a tragedy that made him a suitable match for her, according to her mother. Her future had been decided for her, and she felt powerless to change it. But Lily's heart still clung to something else, something that didn't belong in the world her mother had created. Love. She hadn't even met Alexander yet, but how could she love a man who wasn't her choice? How could she build a life with someone whose blindness overshadowed everything else? She didn't know, but she would soon have to find out. A week later, Lily found herself standing in the grand Westbrook mansion, a place of opulence and wealth. Her mother's vision was clear. This was the life she was meant to have. But it didn't feel like her own. It felt like a story she was being forced to play a part in. As Lily entered the room where Alexander sat, she was struck by the air of quiet strength that surrounded him. He was sitting by the grand window, his face tilted slightly, as if listening to the world around him. Even in his blindness, there was a power to him, a sense of command that made her hesitant to approach. Mr. Westbrook, Lily said softly, unsure of the proper way to address him. It's an honor to meet you. Alexander turned his head slightly in her direction, his eyes unfocused, but his expression calm. The honor is mine, Miss Carter, he replied, his voice smooth and confident, yet with an undertone of something else, something deeper that Lily couldn't quite place. He rose from his seat, extending a hand toward her. The moment their fingers touched, something unexpected stirred within her. She had expected pity, discomfort, maybe even disdain for the arrangement. But instead, there was a strange connection, a pull she hadn't anticipated. Shall we take a walk? He asked gently, his voice warm and inviting. I find that the fresh air helps clear my thoughts. Lily nodded, unsure of what to expect, but unable to resist the allure of his calm presence. As they walked through the expansive gardens, the quiet between them was filled only with the sound of birds and the rustling of leaves. Lily found herself wondering how this man had come to terms with his blindness, how he had navigated the world without sight. She had imagined him to be isolated, perhaps filled with bitterness, but instead, he seemed grounded, connected to the world around him in a way she hadn't expected. You seem lost in thought, Alexander said, breaking the silence as they continued walking. I am, Lily admitted. I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing here. Alexander's lips quirked into a soft smile. I believe we're both trying to figure that out, he said, his voice surprisingly tender. But I think we'll both find the answer soon enough. Lily couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe this wouldn't be as terrible as she thought. Maybe, just maybe, she would find something here, something she hadn't been able to see before. Lily's days with Alexander were becoming an intricate dance of discovery and quiet moments. Every time she saw him, there was something more to uncover, a new layer to his being that she had not anticipated. At first, she had feared that their marriage, arranged by her mother, dictated by expectations, would be a cold, sterile union of convenience. But now, after spending time with him, something unexpected was beginning to emerge. It wasn't love, at least not yet, but it was respect. And for the first time in a long time, Lily found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, there was something more to their connection than just obligation. After that first walk through the garden, their time together had been filled with long, often wordless moments, but those moments spoke volumes. Alexander never spoke about his blindness in a way that would make Lily uncomfortable. He didn't shy away from acknowledging it, but neither did he let it define him. He was, in many ways, everything Lily had been taught to admire. Poised, intelligent, kind, but there was something else to him, something beyond the polished exterior of wealth and control. They were often joined by his housekeeper, a kind woman named Mrs. Miller, who was also his companion and the one who tended to his needs. But as the days stretched into weeks, Lily found herself spending more and more time with Alexander. Not because she had to, no, this wasn't an obligation, but because, without realizing it, she was drawn to him. One evening, as they sat in his grand library, surrounded by towering bookshelves filled with the knowledge and history of centuries, Alexander leaned back in his chair and tilted his head slightly. "You're quiet today, Miss Carter," he said, his voice low and reflective. Lily met his gaze, unsure how to respond. She had been quiet lately, lost in her thoughts. The weight of their arrangement still hung over her, and despite the connection she felt with him, she couldn't ignore the deep-rooted fear that she was simply replacing someone, her sister, Isabella. It was a feeling that didn't vanish just because Alexander was easy to talk to, or because she felt a growing bond with him. It was something that gnawed at her heart, a constant reminder that she was living someone else's life. "I'm just thinking," Lily admitted, setting her teacup down on the table. "I don't know if I'm living my own life anymore, Alexander. It feels like I'm trying to be someone else. I'm trying to be the woman my mother wants me to be." Alexander nodded slowly, as if considering her words carefully. "It's not easy, is it? To step into shoes you never wanted to wear. To be expected to fulfill a role you never auditioned for." Lily was taken aback by his insight. "You understand," she said softly, her eyes wide. "I do," he replied simply. "Perhaps not in the way you think, but I understand the burden of expectations. I've lived my entire life expected to fulfill a role I never chose. Blindness doesn't just take your sight. It takes away your agency, your ability to navigate the world the way you want to. I may not be who people expect me to be, but I've learned to accept it." Lily felt a pang of empathy. "That must be incredibly hard." "It is," he said with a small, self-deprecating smile. "But I've learned something along the way. It's not the role you're forced into that defines you. It's what you choose to do with it." Lily paused, his words sinking in. She had never considered this perspective before. She had always been defined by her mother's expectations, by the image of what she was supposed to be. She had been expected to marry someone who could fill the void left by Isabella's absence, and Alexander, blind and wealthy, was the perfect candidate. But now, sitting here with him, something had shifted. She realized that maybe she too could choose who she wanted to be. As the days passed, Lily began to open up more to Alexander. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond the surface of their arranged marriage to more personal matters. She learned about his life before the accident, about the man he had once been, someone who had been driven by ambition, someone who had once believed that success was everything. He had lost his sight in a tragic accident, but he had gained so much in return: wisdom, patience, and a quiet resilience that spoke volumes. She shared her own story with him, about growing up in the shadow of her sister, about the weight of her mother's expectations, about the sacrifices she had made to keep her family together. It was the first time Lily had opened up like this in years, and there was something liberating about it. "I never thought I would marry someone I barely knew," Lily said one evening, her voice vulnerable. "But here we are." Alexander reached across the table, his hand brushing hers gently. The simple touch sent a shiver down her spine, though she didn't pull away. There was something unspoken between them, something that wasn't driven by obligation or force, but by a mutual understanding. "You don't have to marry me for my wealth, Lily," Alexander said softly. "You don't have to stay with me out of duty. I may be blind, but I can still see the truth." Lily felt a lump form in her throat. She had never thought of it like that before. She had never given herself permission to see the possibility of love in this marriage. But here, in this quiet moment, she realized that perhaps, somewhere deep inside, she had been holding on to the idea that love could still grow between them. The following evening, Lily found herself walking in the garden with Alexander. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine, the night sky clear and punctuated by stars. Alexander's cane tapped softly against the stone path as he guided them through the garden, his steps confident despite his blindness. "I've always loved the outdoors," Lily said, her voice soft. "The way the world feels when the sun sets, there's something magical about it." "I've always imagined the sunset," Alexander replied, his voice thoughtful. "In my mind, it's a golden swirl of light, the way the sky burns before the night takes over. I've never seen it, but I've always felt it." Lily smiled, imagining his words painting a picture in her mind. "That's beautiful," she said quietly. Alexander stopped walking and turned toward her, his face mere inches from hers. She could feel the warmth of his breath against her skin, could sense the unspoken emotion hanging between them. "Lily," he said gently, his hand reaching out to touch her cheek. "I know that this marriage was arranged. I know that you didn't have a choice in this. But I want you to know that I see you. Not for your mother's expectations, not for the role you've been forced to play, but for the woman you are. And if I'm going to marry you, I want to know the real you." Lily's heart raced as she gazed into his eyes, seeing the sincerity in them. She felt a rush of emotions, confusion, fear, and something deeper, something that made her want to stay in this moment forever. "I'm not sure I know the real me anymore," Lily admitted, her voice trembling. "I think you do," Alexander said softly, his voice filled with warmth. "And I think you're beginning to see it." In that moment, Lily realized that she had been hiding from herself for so long, trying to be what others wanted her to be. But here, with Alexander, she didn't have to hide. She didn't have to be the replacement for her sister, the daughter who fulfilled her mother's dream. She could be herself, whoever that was. The days that followed were filled with small moments of connection. As Lily continued her quiet journey of self-discovery, she found herself growing more comfortable with the idea of her marriage to Alexander, not because it had been forced upon her, but because she was starting to see him in a new light. He wasn't just a blind man with wealth. He wasn't just the man who had been handed a tragic fate. He was someone who had endured, someone who had found strength in the face of unimaginable loss, someone who was patient enough to understand that life had its own pace, that relationships took time to bloom. And though they hadn't said it out loud, something between them had changed. There was a bond forming, subtle and gentle, like the slow unfurling of a flower. Lily wasn't sure what it meant, but she could feel it every time their eyes met, every time their hands brushed. The connection between them was undeniable, even if neither of them fully understood it yet. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Lily found herself sitting in the library of their home, thumbing through a book she had never gotten around to reading. It was a quiet night, and Alexander had retreated to his study to work on some business matters. The house was still, the only sound the soft rustling of pages and the occasional tapping of a key on the typewriter in Alexander's study. Lily had grown to appreciate the silence. It wasn't an uncomfortable quiet, but a peaceful one that allowed her the space to think. She thought about her mother and the pressure she had placed on her, about her sister and the impossible standards she had set, and about Alexander, who, despite his blindness, seemed to see her in ways no one else had. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Alexander's voice from the doorway. "Lily," he called softly, his footsteps nearing. "Can I join you?" Lily looked up from her book and smiled. "Of course. I was just reading, but I'd love the company." Alexander smiled and stepped into the room, his cane tapping lightly against the floor. He seemed at ease in the house now, the stillness of the evening his natural environment. He sat down beside her without hesitation, his presence filling the space between them. "I'm glad we're here," he said, his voice warm, almost vulnerable. "I don't know what it is, but there's something about this place that makes me feel whole in a way. Not perfect, but more myself." Lily looked at him, her heart swelling with something she couldn't name. "I know what you mean," she admitted. "I've been struggling with what I'm supposed to be. I've been so focused on what everyone else expects of me that I've forgotten who I am." He tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words. "I think you've been so focused on everyone else that you've forgotten what it means to live for yourself. What makes you happy? What do you really want?" Lily blinked, taken aback by his insight. "I've never really thought about it," she confessed. "I've always done what was expected. I've always been the dutiful daughter, the one who followed the rules. And now?" Alexander asked gently, his voice a whisper in the quiet room. "What do you want now, Lily?" She looked at him, his face calm but filled with an understanding that made her feel like she had permission to speak freely. "I want to live. I want to be more than just my mother's daughter. I want to feel like I'm making choices for myself, not because someone else is pulling the strings." The next few weeks passed in a quiet, reflective haze. Lily found herself slowly coming out of her shell, becoming more comfortable in her marriage to Alexander. She would often catch herself smiling when he wasn't looking, watching him with growing affection as he navigated the world in his own unique way. Despite his blindness, Alexander had a sharpness that most people didn't possess. His mind was astute, his sense of humor dry but engaging. And Lily found herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't expected. One afternoon, as they took a walk through the estate's grounds, Lily could sense the shift in their relationship. It wasn't just physical, though the gentle touches and lingering glances spoke volumes. It was emotional. There was a depth to Alexander she hadn't understood before, a complexity that she was only now beginning to appreciate. "You know," Lily began, breaking the silence between them, "I've been thinking about what you said the other night, about living for myself. It's strange, but it feels like a revelation. For so long, I've been doing things to please my mother or to fill some role that wasn't mine to play. But I don't think I've ever really asked myself what I want." Alexander smiled at her, his face lit with an expression of encouragement. "And what do you want, Lily?" Lily stopped walking, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to find out." The days turned into weeks, and Lily's growing affection for Alexander deepened. They spent more time together, talking, walking, learning about each other. She began to see him not just as the man she had been forced to marry, but as someone with depth, someone who had suffered and overcome. And Alexander, for his part, began to reveal more about himself, his hopes, his dreams, and his fears. He had never allowed anyone to see his vulnerability before, but with Lily, there was something he couldn't quite hide. But Lily was still uncertain about one thing, whether this was love, or simply the product of a marriage that had been thrust upon her. She found herself questioning everything. Was this the life she was meant to live? Or was she simply filling a role, a duty, to make up for her sister's absence? One evening, as they sat in the library together, the silence between them thick with unspoken words, Lily finally voiced the question that had been plaguing her. "Alexander, do you think it's possible to fall in love with someone out of obligation?" He turned toward her, his face thoughtful, his brow furrowed. "Obligation," he repeated. "No, I don't think love works that way. Love isn't a choice forced upon you. It's something that happens, something you feel when the time is right. But it's not something that should be dictated by duty. It's something you choose, over and over again." Lily's heart skipped a beat. His words echoed in her mind, and for the first time, she began to question what she had believed to be true. Maybe she had been living in the shadow of obligation for too long. Maybe love wasn't about fulfilling expectations. It was about choosing to love, despite the circumstances. The next day, as Lily walked through the estate's garden, she stopped by a blooming rose bush, its vibrant red petals unfurling in the morning sun. She thought about what Alexander had said about love being a choice, and something shifted within her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that the connection she had with him was real. Maybe it wasn't perfect, and maybe it wasn't the fairy tale she had imagined, but it was theirs. And that, she realized, was enough. The weeks that followed Alexander's words weighed heavily on Lily's heart. She had spent most of her life following someone else's vision for her mother's, society's, and even her sister's. But now, for the first time, she felt like she had the space to breathe. Her own heart, once silenced by the expectations of others, was beginning to whisper a quiet truth. She wasn't entirely sure what that truth was, but one thing had become clear. Something was shifting between her and Alexander. Their connection, once defined by obligation and circumstance, had deepened into something more. There were moments when Lily caught herself looking at him, her gaze lingering, her heart swelling with a strange mix of tenderness and longing. One evening, as they sat together by the fire in the grand living room, Lily could feel the weight of the silence between them. Alexander was sitting across from her, reading through a set of papers. He was calm, his usual poise intact, but there was something different in the air. Lily's heart raced as she studied him, his strong jawline, his broad shoulders, the quiet confidence that exuded from him even in his blindness. It had taken some time for her to realize this, but she was beginning to understand something that had eluded her for so long. She had feelings for him. Real feelings. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt for her mother's wishes, but because she was starting to see him for who he truly was. But there was one thing she still couldn't reconcile, the guilt. Her mother had orchestrated this marriage for the wrong reasons. And though Lily had grown to admire Alexander and feel a bond with him, she still couldn't shake the sense of duty that clung to her. She wasn't sure if she had chosen this life for herself, or if it had been thrust upon her by the pressures of her mother's plans. As if sensing her thoughts, Alexander set the papers down and turned to her, his expression softening. "You've been quiet tonight," he said gently, his voice filled with a tenderness that made her stomach flutter. Lily looked up, surprised to find him so attuned to her. He had always been perceptive, but tonight, he seemed to understand her more deeply than ever before. She smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I've just been thinking," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. "About us. About this marriage." He raised an eyebrow, his gaze intent on her. "And what have you been thinking?" Lily hesitated, her heart pounding as she struggled to find the right words. "I've been wondering if this is real. If what I feel for you is real, or if it's just me trying to convince myself that this life I'm living is the one I'm meant to have." Alexander's expression softened, and for a moment, he looked almost sad. "I think," he began slowly, "that you've been living your life for others for so long, Lily, that you've forgotten how to listen to your own heart. You're trying to understand your feelings by looking at the surface. But love, like everything else in life, requires time to grow. It's not a decision you can make overnight. It's a journey." Lily's heart fluttered at his words. She had never heard anyone speak to her like this, so understanding, so patient. It was as though Alexander was offering her something she had never truly been given, the freedom to be herself, to explore her emotions without judgment. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he continued, his voice steady but gentle. "But know this, I am here, for whatever you need, and whatever you decide, I will respect it, but I won't push you." Lily blinked, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "I don't know if I'm ready to love you yet," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I even know what love is anymore." "I don't need you to love me right away," Alexander replied, his hand reaching out to gently touch hers. "I need you to be honest with yourself. And I need you to trust that, with time, you'll find your way, whether it's with me or on your own." Lily's heart swelled at his words. He wasn't asking for her to love him out of obligation. He wasn't forcing her into a role she wasn't ready to play. He was offering her the space to grow, the space to figure out who she truly was, and whether or not that meant loving him. Over the next few days, Lily found herself in a state of quiet contemplation. She had never allowed herself the luxury of time before, time to reflect, to understand her emotions, to decide what kind of future she truly wanted. But now, for the first time in years, she felt like she had the space to choose. She spent her days walking through the estate's sprawling grounds, her thoughts swirling around the same question. Was she capable of loving Alexander? Or was she simply settling for him because he was the man her mother had chosen for her? Her guilt weighed heavily on her, especially when she thought about her sister, Isabella. The role Lily had been asked to play was to replace the daughter her mother had lost. She had been pushed into this marriage, into this life, because of a void that Isabella had left behind. But was that really fair to Alexander? Was it fair to him to marry a woman who wasn't sure of her feelings? One evening, as she wandered the garden, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Alexander's voice. "Lily," he called gently, his footsteps slow but deliberate. "Can I walk with you?" Lily turned to find him approaching, his cane tapping rhythmically against the stone path. She smiled softly, feeling her heart skip at the sight of him. "Of course," she replied, stepping closer to him. They walked together, side by side, the quiet of the garden enveloping them. For the first time, Lily realized how at peace she felt with him beside her. It wasn't just the comfort of his presence, it was the way he made her feel seen, understood, without the pressure of expectations. "You know," Lily said after a long pause, her voice hesitant but filled with sincerity, "I've been struggling with the idea of what's real. What's right. I don't know if I can love you the way you deserve to be loved." Alexander turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Lily," he said softly, his voice steady but full of warmth, "you don't have to love me right away. What you have to do is take your time. Let yourself feel whatever it is you need to feel. And if, one day, you come to find that you love me, then that will be the most beautiful thing of all." Lily's heart swelled with emotion as his words sunk in. Alexander wasn't asking for her to change for him. He wasn't asking for her to love him out of obligation. He was offering her a freedom she had never known, a freedom to explore her feelings, to choose her path, without the weight of her mother's expectations hanging over her. That night, as Lily lay in bed, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She wasn't sure where this journey would take her, or if she would ever truly love Alexander. But she knew one thing for sure. He had given her something no one else had: space. Space to be herself. Space to choose. And in that, she found something she hadn't realized she was looking for. Lily's days continued to stretch into weeks, each one filled with moments of reflection and growing uncertainty. The more time she spent with Alexander, the more conflicted she became. It wasn't that she didn't enjoy his company. She did. In fact, there were moments when her heart beat faster, when his quiet words or his gentle touch made her feel something deep inside. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this marriage wasn't hers to begin with. Her mother's expectations, the role she had been forced into, lingered in the back of her mind, like a shadow that she couldn't outrun. How could she possibly love a man when she wasn't even sure if she had the freedom to choose who she truly wanted? One evening, as Lily sat in the parlor with a book in her lap, she couldn't help but overhear her mother's voice in the hallway. Claire was speaking with Mrs. Miller, the housekeeper, and though Lily didn't mean to eavesdrop, the conversation caught her attention. "I'm so glad Lily is marrying Alexander," Claire said, her voice filled with satisfaction. "She'll be well taken care of. His wealth and status will ensure that she has everything she needs. It's what's best for her. For all of us." Lily's stomach churned as she listened to her mother's words. She had never been able to shake the feeling that her mother's love came with strings attached, that her happiness was always secondary to the family's reputation. She had been raised to be the perfect daughter, the perfect replacement for her sister, but now, with her mother's words echoing in her mind, Lily began to question whether she would ever truly be allowed to live for herself. The rest of the conversation faded into the background as Lily's thoughts swirled. She was no longer just the dutiful daughter. She was a woman trying to find her own path. She had spent so many years following her mother's lead, doing what was expected of her, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be her own person. And in that moment, Lily realized something crucial. She needed to make a choice. She couldn't continue to live her life as someone's replacement, as someone who had been chosen for a role she hadn't asked for. She needed to figure out who she really was, apart from the expectations that had been placed on her. The following day, Lily found herself walking through the estate's gardens, the cool air brushing against her skin as she tried to clear her mind. The flowers were beginning to bloom, and the scent of jasmine and rose filled the air. Despite the beauty surrounding her, Lily felt a growing heaviness in her chest. She stopped by a large oak tree and leaned against it, closing her eyes for a moment. She had never allowed herself to pause before, to simply be with her thoughts. She had been so caught up in trying to be what everyone else wanted that she had forgotten to listen to her own heart. "You look troubled," a voice said from behind her, and Lily turned to find Alexander approaching. She smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm just thinking," she said quietly, "about everything." He stopped beside her, his hand resting gently on the tree as he faced her. "I understand," he said softly. "It's a lot to process." Lily met his gaze, feeling a lump form in her throat. "I've spent so much of my life trying to live up to what others expect of me. I've been the perfect daughter, the perfect replacement for Isabella. And now I'm not sure who I am anymore." Alexander's expression softened with understanding. "Lily, you don't have to be anyone else. You don't have to be your mother's vision of who you should be. You're allowed to make your own choices, to live for yourself." Tears welled up in her eyes as his words settled in her heart. "But what if I've lost myself along the way?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "What if I'm too far gone?" "You're not," he said firmly, stepping closer. "You're not too far gone. You've just been living under a shadow. But shadows fade when the light comes in. And you have the power to let that light shine." Lily felt a surge of something inside her, a mixture of hope and fear. Alexander wasn't just offering her words of comfort. He was offering her something more. He was offering her the freedom to choose, to take control of her own life. For the first time, Lily realized that she didn't have to stay in this marriage out of obligation. She didn't have to live a life she hadn't chosen. She had the power to change her own destiny. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Lily spent more time with Alexander, trying to understand the connection they shared. It wasn't just physical attraction. It was something deeper, something that transcended the circumstances of their marriage. Alexander had been patient with her, giving her space to find her own answers, but as the days passed, she began to feel something stir in her heart, a quiet but undeniable affection. One evening, as they sat by the fire in the drawing room, Lily turned to Alexander, her heart beating faster than usual. "Alexander," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I've been thinking about us, about this marriage." He looked at her, his eyes filled with quiet anticipation. "What have you been thinking?" Lily took a deep breath. She had never allowed herself to say the words she was about to say, but now, in this moment, it felt like the only choice. "I don't know what the future holds for us. I don't know if I can love you the way you deserve to be loved, but I want to try." Alexander's lips quirked into a soft smile. "That's all I can ask for," he said gently. "We don't have to rush into anything. We don't have to define it right now. Just take it one day at a time." Lily felt a sense of relief wash over her. She didn't have to have all the answers. She didn't have to force herself to feel something she wasn't ready for. But she could try. She could choose to be with him, to explore this connection without the weight of her mother's expectations hanging over her. And in that moment, Lily knew that she had finally taken the first step toward finding herself. She had stopped living for everyone else. She had stopped letting her mother's plans dictate her future. And maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to understand that love, real love, could grow from this unexpected beginning. The days after their conversation were a mixture of quiet reflection and growing anticipation. Lily knew, deep down, that things were changing, inside of her, in her heart, and in her relationship with Alexander. But she was still wrestling with doubts, unsure whether she was simply playing a part in a story that had been written for her, or if she was truly starting to find her own voice. She spent her mornings walking through the sprawling estate, her mind constantly turning over the decisions that lay ahead. It wasn't just about Alexander. It was about her future, about who she was becoming, about whether she could embrace the freedom she'd been given, or if she would always be tethered to the shadow of her past. One afternoon, as Lily was sitting by the window in the library, watching the world outside, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Alexander approaching, his presence as steady and assured as always. His blindness had never been a barrier for him, and in many ways, it made him more perceptive than others. He didn't just see, he understood. "Lily," he said, his voice low but filled with warmth. "There's something I need to say." Lily turned toward him, a little caught off guard by the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" she asked, her voice soft. Alexander paused for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I don't want you to feel pressured to be something you're not. I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything. This marriage, it's not just about fulfilling an obligation. It's about building something real, something that we both want." Lily's heart fluttered at his words. They weren't the words of a man demanding affection, or even a man asking for love. They were the words of someone who understood her fears, her uncertainties, and was offering her the space to make her own decision. "I don't want you to feel trapped," he continued, his voice steady. "You don't have to be with me because of your mother's plan, or because of some expectation you've been carrying around for years. I'm not asking you to love me right now. What I'm asking for is the freedom to choose for ourselves." Lily's throat tightened as his words sank in. For the first time since her marriage had been arranged, she felt as though she could breathe, as though she could finally make a choice that was her own. "I'm scared," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent so much of my life living for other people, doing what was expected of me. I don't know if I can choose differently, Alexander. I don't know if I can choose myself." Alexander took a step closer to her, his hand gently resting on hers. "You can, Lily. It's not about abandoning everyone else. It's about finding a way to live that feels true to you. No one can do that for you." As the weeks passed, the conversations between Alexander and Lily grew deeper, more intimate. They began to share not just their hopes and dreams, but their fears as well, the parts of themselves they had kept hidden from the world. Alexander told her about his childhood, about the man he had been before his accident, and the grief he had carried for years. He spoke about the ways his blindness had forced him to see the world differently, how it had taught him to trust his instincts, to rely on the people around him, to build his strength from the inside out. Lily, in turn, began to share her own story, the struggles she had faced growing up, her constant battle to live up to her mother's expectations, and the weight of being compared to her late sister, Isabella. She told him about the guilt she had carried for so long, the guilt of being forced to fill a void that wasn't hers to fill. She had spent her life trying to be someone she wasn't, trying to make everyone happy except herself. "Why do you think you've been holding on to that guilt?" Alexander asked one evening as they sat on the porch, the sun setting behind them in a wash of pink and orange. Lily let out a shaky breath, looking out at the horizon. I think I've always believed that I wasn't enough. That I wasn't worthy of love or happiness unless I was perfect, unless I met everyone else's expectations. And when Isabella died, I thought that I had to be the person my mother wanted me to be, to fill the void she left behind." Alexander reached over and took her hand in his grip firm but gentle. "You've never been the replacement, Lily. Not for your sister. Not for anyone. You are enough, just as you are. You've always been enough." His words settled into her heart like a balm, soothing a wound she had carried for years. She had spent so much time trying to be perfect, trying to live up to other people's ideas of who she was meant to be, that she had forgotten to listen to the most important voice of all, her own. The days grew warmer, and with the arrival of summer, Lily found herself falling into a rhythm with Alexander. They spent more time together, walking through the gardens, discussing books, and enjoying quiet dinners in the evening. And though their marriage had started as a contract, something had begun to shift. There was a tenderness between them that had developed slowly, over time, until it was undeniable. But even as she felt herself growing closer to him, Lily knew that she couldn't rush this. She couldn't force herself to feel something she wasn't ready to feel. The love that was beginning to blossom between them couldn't be manufactured. It had to come naturally, at its own pace. One afternoon, as they were sitting on the terrace, Alexander turned to her, his expression serious. "Lily," he said quietly, his voice gentle. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day, about needing to choose yourself. I know it's not easy, and I know you've been carrying a lot of weight for a long time. But I need you to know something. You don't have to choose me. You don't have to stay in this marriage because you feel like you have to." Lily looked at him, surprised by his words. "But what if I want to stay?" she asked, her heart beating faster at the thought. Alexander smiled, his eyes softening. "Then stay, because it's what you want. Stay because you see something real here. But don't stay because you feel obligated." Lily felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sense of peace she hadn't realized she was craving. For the first time, she understood what he was offering her. He wasn't just offering her a marriage. He was offering her the freedom to choose him, to choose herself, without guilt or fear. That night, as they sat together under the stars, Lily took a deep breath. She had never truly allowed herself to make a choice before. But tonight, everything felt different. The weight of her mother's expectations, the guilt, the fear of failure, they all seemed to fade away in the quiet of the night. She turned to Alexander, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know if I'm ready to love you yet," she said, her voice low and unsure. "But I want to try. I want to choose this. Choose you." Alexander's smile was gentle, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That's all I ask for, Lily. A chance. A chance to see where this goes." And as she looked into his eyes, Lily realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something real. Not because she had to, not because of duty or obligation, but because she had finally chosen to follow her heart. The weeks after Lily's decision to truly open herself up to the possibility of love with Alexander were filled with quiet moments of realization. There was a new lightness to her steps, a kind of freedom she had never experienced before. For so long, she had been living under the heavy expectations of her mother, and though she loved her mother in her own way, she realized that she could never live for her again. It wasn't just a choice, it was a necessity. If she wanted to build her own future, if she wanted to find happiness, she had to choose her own path. And as the days passed, that path became clearer. Lily found herself falling more deeply into her marriage with Alexander, not out of obligation, but because of the man he was. There were moments of hesitation, moments when the weight of her past threatened to pull her back into the shadows, but every time she was with him, those doubts seemed to melt away, replaced by the tenderness and honesty that had slowly built between them. One evening, as the sun began to set and the warm hues of dusk spilled across the sky, Lily and Alexander sat together on the porch of their estate. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine, and the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze was the only sound that filled the space between them. Lily had been feeling restless, her thoughts swirling with the realization that her feelings for Alexander had begun to evolve in ways she hadn't expected. It was no longer just a quiet, tentative affection. It was something deeper, something she couldn't ignore any longer. She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice unsure but steady, "about everything that's happened between us, about the way I've been feeling." Alexander turned his head toward her, his eyes soft and understanding. "What have you been thinking about?" Lily's chest tightened, but she pushed the fear away. She had come this far. She had come to understand so much about herself, about her own desires, about what it meant to choose a path that was her own. It was time to confront the final piece of her truth. I think I'm in love with you," she whispered, the words coming out in a rush, as if once they were spoken, the world would shift. For a moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that felt like the earth had stopped moving, as if everything had held its breath. Lily's heart hammered in her chest as she waited for Alexander's response. She wasn't sure why she had waited so long to say the words, but now that they were out there, she felt as though a weight had been lifted. When Alexander spoke, it wasn't with the rush of excitement she had expected. Instead, His voice was steady, filled with a quiet calm that resonated deep within her. "Lily," he said gently, "I've known that for a while." Lily's heart skipped a beat, her confusion evident on her face. "You've known? But I—" He reached out, taking her hand in his touch reassuring. "I've known because I can see it in the way you look at me, the way you care for me. I don't need to see with my eyes to know when someone is truly present for me. I've felt your presence, Lily. I've felt the change in you. And I can feel it in my heart. You've been through so much. You've had to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, living for others, living for what others want. But now, I see you living for yourself. And that's how I know. That's how I know you love me." Lily blinked back tears, her heart swelling in her chest. She had never expected Alexander to say those words so easily, but hearing them from him made everything fall into place. It wasn't just her choice to love him, it was his choice, too. He had loved her, not for who she was forced to be, but for who she had become, for who she was choosing to be. "I never thought this would be possible," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I never thought I could love again, not after everything. Not after the way my mother tried to force this marriage on me, after living in the shadow of my sister. But now I can see it. I can feel it. I love you, Alexander." The next few days were filled with a quiet joy that Lily had never known before. She and Alexander spent more time together, learning more about each other than they ever had before. They talked about their hopes for the future, their fears, their pasts. Lily shared more about her childhood, about the way she had felt invisible in her mother's eyes, how she had always felt like a substitute for Isabella. And Alexander, in turn, spoke more about his life before his blindness, the way he had once been driven by ambition and wealth, until the accident had changed everything. Lily had always thought she had to have it all figured out, that she had to be perfect to meet the expectations of others. But now, she realized that life wasn't about perfection. It was about embracing who you were and allowing yourself to grow. It was about choosing love, not because it was expected, but because it was real. She had chosen Alexander, and in doing so, she had chosen herself. One evening, as they sat on the edge of the balcony, the soft glow of the setting sun painting the world in shades of gold and amber, Alexander turned to her, his eyes filled with something Lily hadn't seen before. It wasn't just affection, it was a depth of emotion that transcended everything they had been through. "Lily," he said softly, his hand gently taking hers, "I want to build a future with you. Not because I have to, not because it's expected, but because I want to. I've waited for a long time to find someone like you. Someone who understands me. Someone who doesn't see me as a man who is blind, but as a man who is whole." Lily's heart swelled at his words. She had never expected to find someone who truly understood her, someone who had seen beyond the surface, beyond the life her mother had planned for her. "Are you saying that you want to spend the rest of your life with me?" she asked, her voice a mixture of hope and wonder. Alexander's smile was gentle, his eyes warm. "Yes, Lily. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Not because I need you to be my replacement, but because you are the person I've been waiting for." The next few months flew by in a haze of new beginnings. Lily and Alexander grew closer, their bond deepening with each passing day. Their love wasn't perfect. It wasn't without its challenges. There were still moments when Lily's past haunted her, when the weight of her mother's expectations threatened to pull her back into a life she didn't want. But every time she looked at Alexander, every time he smiled at her, every time he took her hand in his, she knew that she had made the right choice. She had chosen love. She had chosen herself. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and Lily found herself in a world she had never anticipated, a world where she could truly be herself. Every decision she made, every choice, felt like an act of liberation, a step toward the future she had long yearned for but never believed she could have. She and Alexander had come to understand one another in ways she hadn't imagined possible when they first met. What had begun as an arranged marriage, A duty fulfilled by two people who barely knew each other had blossomed into something far deeper than she could have ever expected. They had spent time together in their shared silence and in their quiet conversations, and in those moments, Lily realized that the connection they shared wasn't a result of obligation. It was the result of their mutual respect and the acceptance of each other's vulnerabilities. One evening, as they sat on the terrace of their estate, the setting sun casting long shadows across the garden, Lily turned to Alexander, her heart brimming with something she could no longer keep inside. "Alexander," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion, "I've been thinking about everything, the way we've grown, the way we've found each other in all of this. I never expected to feel this way. I didn't know love could come from something like this. It feels like it's been growing, slowly but surely, until now. Now I can't imagine my life without you." Alexander turned to her, his gaze soft but intense, his hand reaching for hers. "Lily, you don't have to say anything if you're not ready. I've never asked you to love me overnight. All I've ever wanted was for you to find your own path, to find your own heart." Lily shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "But I found it. I found my heart, and it's here with you." The days that followed were filled with new discoveries, not just about Alexander, but about herself. Lily had always believed that her life was a series of obligations, a path laid out for her by others. But as her heart opened more to Alexander and their future, she realized that her life was her own to shape. The weight of her mother's expectations, of the role she had been forced into, was beginning to slip away, and in its place, Lily found herself taking charge of her own narrative. She spent more time working alongside Alexander on his business, finding a new sense of purpose that went beyond the walls of their home. Alexander, once the silent, driven man, had come to appreciate her intelligence, her ideas, and her determination. He respected her not because of the wealth she brought into their union, but because of the woman she had become, the woman who could hold her own, who could stand beside him as an equal. And slowly, their relationship began to shift from a partnership forged out of circumstance to one built on mutual admiration and love. One evening, as they walked through the estate's gardens, now in full bloom, with roses of every color surrounding them, Lily stopped and turned to face Alexander, her heart in her throat. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, but it wasn't the kind of burden she had once feared. It was a weight that came from the certainty she had finally found within herself. "Alexander," she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion, "I've been thinking about the future, about everything we've been through together. And I know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I don't need to wait for some grand sign. I don't need to be sure of every step. All I know is that I want to be with you. I want to build something real with you, something that's ours." Alexander's expression softened as he reached out to touch her cheek gently, his fingers brushing against her skin. His voice was quiet but filled with deep affection as he replied, "Lily, I don't think there's anything more real than this. You've given me the greatest gift of all, your heart, and there's nothing more I could ask for." That night, after dinner, Alexander took Lily's hand and led her out to the balcony overlooking the vast estate. The stars twinkled above them, and the soft glow of moonlight bathed the world in a peaceful serenity. Alexander's fingers traced circles on her palm, his touch warm and comforting. It was a simple gesture, but to Lily, it meant everything. "Lily," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've been thinking, too, about us, about the life we've built together. And I've realized something. I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to put off what we both know is true. Will you marry me? Not because it's expected, not because it's a duty, but because I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you choose me forever?" Lily felt her heart leap in her chest as his words sank in. The question she had always feared asking herself was now out in the open, and it wasn't terrifying anymore. It was liberating. She had spent so long living under the shadow of others' expectations, but now, in this moment, she was free. She was free to choose. And she had already made her choice. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Alexander. I will marry you. Their wedding wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. It was a quiet, intimate ceremony held in the gardens of their estate, surrounded by close friends and family. Lily's mother, though she had not fully understood her daughter's choice, was there, watching, perhaps for the first time, as Lily made a decision for herself. For the first time, Lily stood at the center of her own life, and nothing could take that away from her. As Alexander slid the ring onto her finger, his gaze never leaving hers, Lily felt the world shift beneath her feet. It wasn't about the grand wedding, the spectacle of it all. It was about the quiet certainty she had found in her heart, that she had chosen a life for herself. That, in the end, her happiness was her own to create. And as they kissed beneath the canopy of stars, surrounded by the people they loved, Lily realized that love wasn't something that had been planned for her. It wasn't something that had been dictated by her mother or by fate. It was something she had chosen, something that had grown between her and Alexander, something real. In the years that followed, Lily and Alexander built a life together that was grounded in love, respect, and understanding. There were challenges, of course. Life had a way of testing even the strongest of foundations, but they faced them together, side by side. Lily continued to find herself in new ways, discovering passions she had never known she had, while Alexander became more and more the man he had always wanted to be, someone who valued love, not for what it could give him, but for what it could bring to others. And as they stood hand in hand, watching the sun set over the horizon, Lily knew that they had found something rare, a love that wasn't born from expectation or duty, but from choice. The life they had created was their own, and it was enough.